Okay, a very good evening to everybody joining us today. My name is Bilal Kırkıcı. I'm the director of the School of Foreign Languages. It is an honor and privilege to welcome you all on behalf of the METU SFL, the Department of Basic English and the Modern Languages Department to another very interesting online session. We've been looking forward to this one for a long time, in fact. Together with the professional development units of the DBE and the MLD, we started our series of online sessions in January 2021. And we have ever since hosted 3 distinguished speakers who have held 4 highly informative sessions touching upon topics in the affective domain, like mindfulness, psychological flexibility and resilience, procrastination, and the like. The reason why we focused mainly on the affective domain is the very difficult period that we all have been going through since the early months of 2020. The difficulties are actually still ongoing, but so is life and so is the show. Therefore, we'd like to move on and continue with sessions that zoom in on potential and actual issues in the profession. So today, I am excited to welcome a great scholar, speaker, as you will see in a minute, colleague and dear friend, Dr. Betül Eröz, who will help us concentrate and reflect on a very essential aspect of the language learning teaching process, reflection. Reflection can be broadly defined as a thinking process which gives coherence to a situation which is initially incoherent or unclear. I have no doubt that by the end of her talk, Betül Hoca will have stimulated us all to think more critically and more coherently about our assumptions, experience, and views as pre-service or in-service language teachers or as language learners. Once more, many thanks to everybody joining us on YouTube, to the members of the PDUs, and of course, many special thanks to Betül Hoca for accepting our invitation and for being with us this evening. So without further ado, Dr. Betül Eröz.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Bilal Hocam. I hope this is going to be an interesting session as you suggest. And good evening, everyone. And thank you for having me as a part of the speaker series. It's really an honor to be here as part of your part of the SFL series. And I'm going to talk about, as Bilal Hoca said, reflection in learning, teaching, and training. Let me start by sharing. I have a PowerPoint presentation that I will share with you. Can you see this? I hope so. Okay. Okay, so we'll talk about reflection in language learning, language teaching, and language teacher training and teacher education. Okay, and my name is Betül Eröz, and I'm also an associate professor at the Department of Foreign Language Education at Middle East Technical University. And this is the overview of my talk. We'll start by talking about reflection a little bit, then I'll talk about reflective learning, and I'll move on to reflective teaching practice. So what is reflection? Is reflection the same thing as thinking? Is there any difference between these two? Well, actually, not all thinking is reflective in nature. So what is the difference between these two, and how does thinking become reflective? In order to address these issues, we need to understand certain criteria for thinking to be reflective. Rogers presents us 4 criteria for reflection. First of all, reflection is a meaning-making process that helps a learner move from one experience into the next one with a deep understanding of its relationship with and connection to other previous experiences and ideas. Reflection is also systematic, it's rigorous, and it's a disciplined way of thinking that has roots in scientific inquiry, research. Reflection requires attitudes that value the personal and intellectual growth of oneself and of others. So in this sense, we can say that it has reciprocal benefits for all members or stakeholders in the reflection process. And finally, reflection needs to happen in a community, in social interaction with others. So these reflection criteria are essential, especially when we are talking about reflective learning and reflective teaching. Notice that in the last criteria on the list, we see an emphasis on collaboration. Rogers highlights the benefits of collaborative reflection in learning and teaching by identifying some factors. Collaborative reflection helps us affirm the value of our experience. For example, when we're in isolation, critical issues may be easily dismissed as unimportant. Like, we have a problem in a classroom, and if we just not talk about that, it might get dismissed or it might appear unimportant. But if we share that with other teachers, we may see that it's a common issue, with a certain learner group. So it doesn't go unnoticed. This kind of reflection also helps us look at things from a new perspective. Other community members working with us offer alternative meanings to lived experiences, broadening the field of understanding. Collaborative reflection also provides motivation to engage in a process of inquiry in taking action. The self-discipline required for systematic and rigorous reflection may be difficult to sustain when we're alone, considering the overwhelming demands of our daily teaching schedule. But when we have accountability to a group, for example, we're part of a research group and we have a task to complete, so we feel responsibility towards them. So if there's interaction, social interaction and reflection, then people actually feel the need to feed each other. This could be something as simple as giving feedback to a classmate's performance on a presentation, or something as complex as being part of a research team carrying out an action research project to enhance instruction at a program. So collaborative reflection brings motivation to the reflection process. So is reflection easy peasy? Is it easy to reflect on our own learning or teaching process? Can everyone do it? Well, according to American educational reformist and philosopher John Dewey, there are some attitudes that an individual needs to have in order to be able to have effective reflection. You can see them on the list over here: wholeheartedness, directness, open-mindedness, and responsibility. So I'm going to follow Rogers' explanations for these to clarify how Dewey relates them to reflection. Wholeheartedness is having enthusiasm about one's own subject matter. Curiosity about and enthusiasm for the subject matter one is studying or teaching is essential. Without these, neither the teacher nor the learner has energy or fuel to carry out reflective inquiry. Directness is not being self-conscious, distracted, or constantly preoccupied with others, how others perceive our performance. It refers to a genuine kind of self-confidence without being arrogant. An individual who believes in the validity of his or her own experience without worrying too much about what others may think of him or her is considered to have directness. The open-mindedness is being receptive to new ways of seeing and understanding phenomena. Open-mindedness, of course, is not blindly accepting all ideas without intelligent critique, but rather being willing to entertain different perspectives from different people. It's also the ability to consider the possibility of error, even in the benefits, in the beliefs that are dearest to us, according to Dewey, and acknowledging the limitations of one's own perspective. And finally, responsibility helps to bind and ground wholeheartedness, directness, and open-mindedness. So it's like the glue, that keeps the first three attitudes together. It's the reality check that poses the question, what are the real life implications of my thinking? This implies that reflection leads to action, which causes change and enhancement of practice. So the four attitudes comprise the essential constituents of what Dewey calls readiness to engage in reflection. So reflective thinking is not as easy or straightforward as it may seem. It requires intrinsic motivation and dedication. Rogers adds curiosity and desire to growth to this list because she says, without these two, the courage required for truly reflective work would be absent. Now, I'll move on to reflective learning. Why, about what, and how learners may be reflective in their language learning. As teachers, you may know that learners sometimes go through lessons without completely understanding everything that's going on in the classroom. And I'm sure right now with online education, everybody has that feeling. And sometimes maybe they won't realize whether they have acquired the targeted skills and the content knowledge. So they may not have that awareness. I'm sure most of you have experienced a student at the end of the term gets a really bad score on the proficiency exam and is shocked, you know. I did so well on the exam, what happened? You know, so that shock of that student actually shows their lack of awareness for how much they've learned in the lesson. But if students are guided to reflect on their own learning process during the course of instruction, they may develop an awareness for their strengths and weaknesses as learners and work more consciously on their actual language needs. They take responsibility for their own learning, which leads them to become autonomous learners and enables them to handle their own challenges with their language learning process. So how does reflective learning affect learning outcomes, or does it? Schaub de Jong summarized different studies to give an answer to this question. Reflective learning enables students to have an in-depth understanding of experiences, their learning experiences, and a strong capacity to using knowledge in new situations. Reflective learning allows students to direct and monitor their own learning process. Reflective learning, if only I could talk, leads students to awareness of emotions and thoughts, which can encourage them to think in new ways and help them develop alternative explanations for learning experiences. And finally, the learning outcomes of reflective learning help students develop self-awareness and awareness of how their beliefs may differ from those of others. So being able to make that comparison and contrast with other people. So what is a good time for reflection for learners, and who helps them through this process? Students may engage in reflection while working on in-class tasks like exercises, pair or group work activities such as competitions, presentations, and other projects. They may also reflect on their own progress while working on individual or group tasks outside the classroom. For example, when they are outlining a composition, or doing research on a topic, or completing homework, preparing for an exam, or compiling portfolios for summative assessment. These are all good opportunities for reflective learning. In their reflective learning process, the teacher may help them by providing oral and written feedback on classroom tasks and exercises, as well as by making corrections on exams and assignments. Their peers, the other students, may also contribute to this reflection by giving feedback on assignments, tasks, or exercises, or while collaborating on group projects. Finally, they may use the guidelines and criteria provided by the teacher, or those that are found in classroom materials and textbooks, to evaluate and correct themselves. Okay, but how do learners reflect on things specifically? Let's talk about them. What are some activities teachers may use to help learners engage in reflective learning? I'll give you first some suggestions from Aydoğmuş and Kurnaz's experimental study on 5th graders. This study reports that learning through reflective tasks yielded positive results, which means the experimental group had higher retention scores than the control group, who did not receive any reflective teaching activities. With the experimental group, they use reflective teaching activities such as stimulus-led warm-up activities in the classroom that had open-ended questions, learning contracts with the students where the students signed contracts saying that they're taking responsibility for their own learning and their own decision-making process, for learning. So that actually leads them into independent learning and autonomous learning. They also had students write learning and reflective journals. Students wrote their personal responses, questions, feelings, their opinions, and the learning processes that they actually experienced in the classroom. The teacher guided and informed the students about the level of classroom activities and the level they reached, by giving feedback for the tasks and assignments. So they had feedback and correction opportunities. They also built concept maps together in the classroom. So they established links between concepts, and they actually observed overlapping concepts in the classroom. So it was like brainstorming, charting concepts together. Then they asked questions. Students, answered some reflective questions. In literature, you might also see this as like Socratic questions, individually or in groups. These are questions such as, what do I know about this issue? What do I need to learn? How long will it take me to find out? So, questions that are helping them think about their own learning at the moment and looking at the future to see how they can develop. They also participated in reflective discussions, focusing on the changes that they observe in their own learning practice. And then they prepared development files. They actually reviewed and revised their earlier work, for assessment purposes. And finally, they did self-assessment tasks. They reflected on their own experience with reflective learning activities and provided a critical perspective on student learning. So if fifth graders can do this, I think university students or high school students, the higher level students would have no trouble doing this. To continue with the how of this question, how do we encourage reflective learning? Students make use of technological tools to produce language and also test their hypotheses about their own production and their own learning, to check their progress and self-correct, when necessary. So they may display their language proficiency and production by means of personal blogs or wikis on a certain subject, or by starting their own YouTube channel where they compile and share their tasks and other recreational languages publicly. As you know, the new generation, especially with online education, all kids now want to be either YouTubers or hackers or both. So this is actually perfect for children. They may also use these technological tools for more passive language use. They may use reference materials to check, their spelling, grammar, punctuation, pronunciation, pragmatic use of language. And they may use online resources like online dictionaries, audiovisual aids. And again, using these tools encourage autonomous learning, making the students more independent as learners and therefore more in control of their own learning progress. Another way for learners to reflect on and assess their own learning effectively and their peers' learning subjectively is by examining the criteria by which they are to be evaluated. So grades, we have to admit that grades are a fact of life for students, and they usually are motivated by grades more than anything else. So sharing grading rubrics and evaluation criteria for tasks and assignments and projects not only helps students with planning, but it also keeps them on task and focused on the expected learning outcomes. I would like to share some samples with you to illustrate this. If you would like to take a look at this, this is a rubric that I use for my speaking class, one of my speaking classes. For this assignment, for example, my students either sing a song, recite a poem, or deliver a piece of news. The criteria and the descriptors, as you can see, for each level are clear and they're distinctive. They're different from each other. So the excellent is clearly different from the good, and that's clearly different from the fair one. So the students, when they look at it, they know that, for example, if they want to get an excellent score on pitch and speech clarity, their voice has to be loud enough, high enough, and they need to be understood very clearly by their audience. So they know this. They could record their presentation or their performance, watch it, and see if they meet this criteria. Okay. They may get feedback from their peers about this issue. So depending on the feedback they get and their own reflection on their performance, they may revise their work for assessment purposes. Here's another rubric, again, a detailed one. And this one I use for TED Talk assignments. So my students prepare short TED Talks for class, and this is the criteria by which they are graded. The main points of evaluation: pronunciation and expression, content and development, nonverbal communication and outfit. Of course, with online education, we'll have to revise these. And the elements under these points are clearly listed and scored, and they have different weights. So students have access to these criteria before they prepare their assignment. And they use this rubric for peer feedback purposes to help each other, review their work before it's graded. It also helps them, compare their performance with the performance of their classmates. And, because they're being graded by the same criteria. So actually just gives them a chance to see their own performance in a comparative mirror. Now, moving on to reflective teaching. Why and what? Burton indicates that reflection in teaching is good practice because it gives teachers the opportunity for lifelong professional development. They become critiques of teaching in general, and they make better informed decisions in and for class. Dewey suggests that teachers need to reflect systematically, not randomly, haphazardly, but systematically on their working context, resources, and actions, and apply what they learn from reflection in everyday and long-term decisions about their own instruction. Reflective teaching is being constantly alert of the circumstances of teaching and the issues that arise doing teaching. So like keeping your eyes and your ears open all the time, okay? Donald Schoen, a more contemporary philosopher who developed the concept of reflective practice, claims that teachers make judgments and decisions in the classroom all the time, okay, without stopping, based on their previous experience and their knowledge of content. So Schoen suggests 3 reflective behaviors, and the 4th one is added by Farrell. And these are knowing in action. Knowing in action draws attention to the immediate link between knowing and doing. It refers to the ability to respond, immediately and automatically to unexpected events during the lesson. In the process of teaching, and I'm sure everybody's going to relate to this, teachers need to make split-second decisions in class. There's little time to sit down, think, ponder, and analyze. So knowing in action refers to the smooth and familiar routines in action that are done skillfully in the classroom by teachers. Reflection in action refers to the spontaneous decisions, adaptations, and changes teachers make in the course of the lesson, during the lesson, while teaching, using their knowledge in action ability based on experience and training. Okay? Reflection in action captures the moments following and preceding a classroom decision made by the teacher. Reflection on action occurs retrospectively after the teaching, when the teacher looks back and identifies critical moments concerning what went well, what needs refining about the completed lesson. So this stage prompts reflection for action. When a teacher analyzes instruction after the lesson, he or she reconceptualizes his or her assumptions about the learners and their progress and plans for the next lesson, anticipating challenges, predicting responses, and of course, preparing accordingly. So it's more of a futuristic stage for reflection. So who would be engaged in reflective teaching and when? Pre-service teachers at micro-teaching level in the teacher education program or at practicum level in the teacher education programs, depending on the courses that they're taking. In-service teachers who participate in an institutional training or a professional development activity, or just any novice or experienced teacher interested in understanding their teaching practice better by examining it closely with the intention of improving their performance could participate in reflective teaching. So who helps these teachers with their reflective teaching? Their peers, their fellow pre-service teachers or professional colleagues, their students, their in-service trainers or pre-service mentors and university supervisors. Okay, so these people form a community of practice for the reflective practitioner, as Schoen calls it. Okay. So Saunders and Wong give us a general checklist with guiding questions for reflection. There are 4 steps in their framework. Description is the first one. This is the description of the teaching incident. What happened? Then the second stage is analysis and interpretation. Why did this happen? Then we have meaning and application, like the significance of this incident. And finally, we have implications for action. That is the plan for change in the future. So you can see some general questions that may actually be some starting point for reflection. So if you get a little bit more specific about this, how do teachers go about with reflective teaching then? What tools or types of activities are available for teachers to engage in reflective teaching? Farrell suggests that teachers may engage in their own, bottom-up reflections through reflection generating activities. So these activities are, first, classroom observations. Using field notes or audio-video recordings of their lessons, teachers may examine whether there's convergence between their actions, decisions, practices in the classroom, and their beliefs and perceptions about what they do in the classroom. So actually what teachers are doing is discovering whether what they say they do in class is actually what's going on in the classroom. Okay, so sometimes we may be a bit, we may have a misled opinion about what we're doing in the classroom, positive or negative. Just doesn't really matter. But we may actually think that we're doing something in the classroom, but that may not be happening. So looking at yourself through, video recordings, it's painful, yes. Hearing your own voice and watching yourself, sometimes it's painful, but it's actually worthwhile. Okay. The next one is teaching portfolio. This is a collection of information about a teacher's practice. It tells the story of the teacher's efforts, skills, abilities, achievements, contributions to students. So teaching portfolio may include the teacher's lesson plans, anecdotal records, student projects, class newsletters, videotapes, annual evaluations, letters of recommendation, anything. Then we may talk about reflective writing. This is another activity teachers may engage in to gain new understandings of their own instructional practices. Reflective writing can include written accounts of teachers' thoughts, classroom observations, assumptions, beliefs, attitudes, and experiences about their practice inside and outside the classroom. So the mode for reflective writing may be in the form of teacher journals, actually pen and paper, or online platforms like blogs, chat rooms, forums, so these may be reflective writing platforms for teachers. Another practice is action research. This is a systematic investigation of a specific classroom problem with the aim of finding a solution to that issue. So teachers inquire their own teaching practice through a cyclical process that involves planning, that's identifying the problem, researching, literature review, observing, which is collecting data, reflecting, analyzing this data, and acting, redefining the problem, trying to fix the problem and finding a solution. So that's action research for teachers. Then we have teacher narratives. These are teacher-generated narrative accounts of that teacher's professional life story. These oral or written accounts offer valuable information for the teacher because they're usually emotionally driven and they can be infused with interpretation. They remind the teacher of the emotions and thoughts at a certain point or moment in their practice, something they can try to understand, explain, or work on through critical reflection later on for class. And finally, we have lesson study. This is a community of practice consisting of teachers, working together to plan and teach various lessons collaboratively. So in a lesson study, a team of teachers plan a lesson together. A teacher delivers the lesson, and after the lesson, the team, which is the teacher, observers, any outside contributors to the team, they gather together to discuss their observations. After the group discussions, the team may revisit the lesson, based on feedback and observation, and a revised lesson may be implemented either to the same class or to a different group of students. Okay, so now we'll move on to reflective training. Student teachers in pre-service education, teacher education, are usually engaged in what Lorty calls an apprenticeship of observation. What does this mean? They learn. This is, something that everybody can relate to, of course, as students. They learn about teaching from the teachers that they have had during their education life. So they form ideas about how to teach, what good teaching is, what bad teaching is, and what kind of teacher is a good teacher or a bad teacher. So everybody has these ideas throughout their education life. But of course, forming an opinion about teaching and teachers doesn't prepare them for actual teaching practice. Therefore, teacher trainers, mentors, and teacher educators provide formal support and instruction to enhance the teaching practice of trainee teachers. There are three models for teacher education: the craft model, applied science model, and reflective model. In the craft model, the trainee imitates the trainer. The trainer is the model, role model. In applied science, all teaching problems are solved by experts in content knowledge, not necessarily practitioners. And reflective model, which is our focus, is the final outcome of training. Says that the final outcome of training should be autonomous teacher, and the teacher should be capable of constant self-reflection, leading to continuous process of professional development. So it's, engaging teachers in self-reflection and providing lifelong reflection and learning opportunities as teachers. Okay. The effectiveness and helpfulness of reflective teacher education has been reported by a number of studies. I'm listing them over here, but I won't go over details about them. In one such study that I conducted at METU, actually with my practicum students, the pre-service teachers reported that reflecting on and receiving feedback from their peers and their supervisor about their videotaped lessons before the graded performance eased their anxiety and boosted their self-confidence. So, reflective training actually proves to be effective emotionally and also academically for the trainees. Okay, so when and who questions now? Reflection in training may take place during pre-service teacher education or in-service teacher training. During pre-service teacher education, the university supervisor and the mentor teacher at the cooperating schools, usually MEP schools, that we take our students to, they observe and give feedback to the student teacher. The trainees examine their class videos and they discuss ways of improving their teaching performance. And they do that several times throughout the semester. A similar procedure is followed in-service teacher training, like the trainer observes the lesson of a trainee teacher, takes notes, and reflects on the lesson with the trainee. If possible, they look at the taped session together. They exchange ideas about what went on in the lesson and ways to enhance teaching. Another reflective training activity is reflection on the training itself. So teacher educators, mentor teachers, and teacher trainers must practice what they preach, and they have to hold themselves accountable to the same criteria to which they hold trainees. It's difficult, to look at yourself through that lens. Once you get used to a role so much, putting yourself in the trainee position might be difficult, but it's necessary. Therefore, they need to inquire critically and reflectively into their own practice every now and then. For this reflection, they may focus on their own teaching performance in class and also on their training sessions where they're giving feedback and exchanging ideas with trainees. Trainees, other trainers and mentors, and students, also learners, may provide feedback and suggestions for the trainer at this point. Okay, how could training be reflective? We'll go back to these questions. What are some tools and procedures available to trainers and supervisors in order to conduct such systematic reflection? Reflective training may be in the form of reflection generating activities as collaborative teacher evaluation and mentorship, critical friends, colleagues, team teaching as a group, and peer coaching. Trainers, or members of teams of communities of practice may watch videotaped performances of trainees in stimulated recall sessions, reflecting on the minute-by-minute incidents of the lesson. So talking about the lesson while watching the lesson and asking questions as they're watching it. Trainees have a chance, during the stimulated recall sessions, trainees have a chance to express their intentions and thoughts during the lesson. So they can talk about their reflection in action choices and their reasoning behind the momentary choices in the classroom. So the trainer would understand them better and may adjust their feedback and criticism accordingly. Maybe the student has a point in acting that way. So when they sit down and talk about it together in front of the performance, then that actually gives them a chance to negotiate in some way. So it's very collaborative. So such sessions clarify the needs, level of awareness, strengths and weaknesses of trainees, and it gives feedback providers opportunity to contribute to the enhancement of the trainees' teaching practice. The group may also follow observation notes and the evaluation criteria for teaching performances to assess the trainees' performance together. Okay, so let us look at a few examples of such observation forms and criteria. Here I would like to share with you a post-teaching self-evaluation form. As you see in this form, this form is made up of open-ended questions. So this is a form that the trainees may fill out after, they teach a lesson. So they may talk about the aspects of the classroom that made them happy, the problems they encountered during the teaching experience, the issues they talked about with their mentor teacher, and what they would change or revise about this lesson. So they're actually reflecting back on the experience and projecting, for their future performance with this form. So they would have to write this in. Or mentor teachers at cooperating schools may fill out a form like this one as they're watching the student teachers in practicum. Following the criteria on the form gives mentors a framework to focus on and guiding points to talk about during the feedback session, because unlike university supervisors, they're not constantly engaged in reflection or reflective exchanges with the trainees. So giving them a guiding form actually helps them focus on what they would like to say to the trainees rather than saying, oh, it was a good lesson. They can actually focus on certain points in the lesson and the strengths and the weaknesses of the trainees. Another form, this is a very general form for any teaching practice that may be used by all stakeholders in the practicum or in-service training program. It gives the feedback provider guidelines and focus points for reflection. For example, we have classroom procedures and lesson planning here. Under that, some detailed points about what to focus on. Then we have self-presentation and classroom persona, how the teacher carries himself or herself in the classroom. And then we have classroom management, which is sometimes problematic for trainee teachers, as you know. Okay, so how they're handling the difficult situations in the classroom. Okay, so I would like to sum up at this point and talk about what we've talked about and see if there are any questions. So giving and receiving Regular and systematic feedback is useful in enhancing learning and teaching practice. Self-evaluation through reflection is powerful as a self-discovery and self-improvement tool for teachers, learners, and trainers. Reflective feedback helps all stakeholders in the learning and teaching setting, including learners, teachers, trainees, mentors, supervisors, and trainers. So it's actually helpful for everybody involved. And showing, instead of telling the trainees, how their lesson went during feedback sessions, is essentially making the comments clear for them. Therefore, video recordings, detailed notes, and observation criteria like the forms that I've just shared with you are important tools for reflective teaching and training. Okay, I'm going to skip my references very quickly, and I will leave you with John Dewey's quote, "We do not learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience." Thank you, everybody, for joining me for this session. And now I could take some questions. Sema Hocam, any questions?
Hocam, thank you very much, first of all.
Sure.
We are expecting some questions, some comments from the participants. In fact, I'd like to say that it's a pleasure that seems this talk has connected a lot of people throughout the country and abroad together. And there are a lot of nice comments. A lot of people are saying hi.
Hello back. I don't see anybody. It's a little strange, but I'm happy to hear that people are saying hi, not bye. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Hocam. And dear participants, if you have any questions and comments, please share it with us using the YouTube chat box. And Betül Hocam will answer those questions. And if not, maybe we can share some. There are a lot of thank you messages, Hocam.
Sure. Oh,
Former students, colleagues.
I forgot to tell them if anybody has any questions or if you would like to see the forms, the sheets, if anybody is interested in taking a look at the forms that I've shared, I would be happy to send them. I had my email actually on the last slide, but maybe, we could share that later. It's easy to find my email online.
Okay, Hocam, then maybe we can have a question as the team.
Sure.
A lot of teachers, being a PDU member, we also experience the same kind of interactions from time to time. A lot of teachers think and comment that the program is always loaded. So considering the case, this situation, at what point of the semester do you think a teacher should introduce the reflective practice to their students?
Other than the ones that I've just talked about?
Yeah, maybe like, is there a certain time after a certain activity in class or a certain practice, or is it a practice that is or that should be done throughout the semester? What kind of questions maybe the teachers can ask their students to start the process?
I want to take should out of that question or that statement, because
Okay,
at the beginning we talked about willingness, motivation, wholeheartedness. These are very important issues. Okay, so the students have to be willing to reflect. You can't really make them become reflective learners and autonomous learners, so they have to be willing to do that. So I really, I'm embarrassed to say this, but I don't have an answer to how to increase the motivation of the students for, being more reflective. But the teachers may try to, as I said, share the criteria with the students. Students feel safe when they know how they are going to be graded. Okay? So telling students the criteria for grading or assessment would be like the first step. So how do they get there? The students often ask, probably it's the same for you, students in my speaking class or my reading class ask this question too: how do I improve my speaking, writing, English in general? How do I pass the proficiency exam? So you can't really tell them, well, you have to be reflective, because they're looking for a shortcut, a better answer than be reflective. But the things we can incorporate into classroom, are more like subtle things that we can incorporate into classroom, like some of the examples that I mentioned from the study, the experimental study. Having reflective questions in the warm-up, having students think about what you did last time, how you're going to connect it to the class this time, and also helping, asking for help from the students, to help each other, pulling students to the side and say, look, can you please help your friend with this? And, just pair up students depending on their strengths. So if they feel like they are useful in the classroom and, collaborating with their friends is helping them improve one way or another, would actually lead to that reflective learning. Because if students are curious, they will want to learn more. If they want to improve their speaking, they will go online and they will find the pronunciation of that word in their presentation that they cannot produce because we don't have that sound in the Turkish language. Okay? So it's actually helping students little by little becoming more autonomous. If the teachers can do this and motivate students to become more responsible for their own learning, reflection is going to come. Nothing that teachers can do, and I don't want to say this, but I'm going to say this. Nothing that teachers can do guarantees an increased motivation level for students. Unfortunately, you know what I'm talking about. So just inspiring them would be one thing, if possible. I don't know if that answers the question. I know this is vague, but
Exactly, Hocam, it does. So the last statement of yours, especially inspiring them, is the key. It just reminds me what you do. I mean, as a student of yours, it really makes sense. Thank you very much. And Hocam, Deniz Hocam has a question. She asks if we should gently correct the student or the trainee if they are not right about their performance. She uses a should statement again, but let me repeat that.
If
should
we as trainers and teacher
student.
educators, if we should correct our students, but correct their what? Body language or pronunciation or grammar or everything?
She just refers to that. She says, I mean, if they are not right about their performance. Maybe she refers to accuracy. I don't know. Speaking of their performance.
Okay. Well, that's what I meant by stimulus recall sessions. I will tell you what I do, and students usually enjoy this. After their teaching session for pre-service teachers, and I take very detailed notes. When I'm observing my students' classes, I write everything that's coming out of their mouth, all the questions, all the statements. If there's a problem, I have like very detailed observation notes. After class, we sit down together. If teachers or trainers cannot take such detailed notes, then they can videotape the lesson. It will be the same thing. So I start with the student, minute 1, this is what you did, this is how the class started. So we actually go through the lesson together. And when you're going through the lesson together, you have to emphasize both the weaknesses and the strengths, the positive and the negative, the accurate and the inaccurate, all of them, at the same time. So you can't just say, this was wrong, that was wrong, this has to change that. You can't just focus on these things. But if you're going through the flow of the lesson, of course, you're saying, oh, you know what, that was a very nice warm-up at the beginning. you smiled at the students and you stood in the middle of the class, and it was very nice. And then you started with this warm-up activity, and then you did this and that. So you're actually telling the student what they have done, which is very nice. And then they're remembering that. And then, you know, at some point you say, you know what, at some point you said determine. Hocam, really? Yes. Oh, I didn't realize. And I said, okay, that's okay. At minute 15 and second, 28, this is what you said. Hocam, did you write that down? Yes, I did write that down. So I'm like a video recorder, but not everybody has to be that way. So you can just be, following that so the student believes that. Sometimes students don't believe me. So it's a good idea to have their videos. They say, Hocam, impossible. No, I didn't say that. I'm like, well, okay. So going through the lesson and having a positive attitude about these things, and not just telling them, oh, this was wrong, you should change it. They can't change it. It's already done. So you have to admit to them that, okay, this is past and this is what you did, and let's focus on what you can do. So that's why in practicum, it's a good idea to observe the students before they're assessed teaching. So it's not too late. So we have to understand the level of our students. We have to know our students, and then we have to know what we can expect from them, and keep our expectations to their level in order not to frustrate them. Because maybe it's the same for many people, but I've learned all of my teaching after I graduated from university. I started teaching, and on the first day of class, I was shaking, with my paper like this, and I had to hide my hand behind my back so my students wouldn't see me shaking. It was so embarrassing. Now I would go into any room, present anything, talk to anybody, teach, whatever. But of course, at the beginning, that's what it is. You learn by teaching. You learn how to teach by teaching. So we have to understand that about pre-service teachers and cut them some slack. Correct them, but correction does not actually lead to automatic, let's say, or systematic and automatic correction of that form in the language proficiency level of that student, unless it's a slip of tongue.
Exactly, Hocam. Thank you.
Sure.
And Samet Hocam has a question. He asks, is it practical to apply reflective teaching? A very direct question. Is it practical to apply reflective teaching?
Where? When? To whom? How? What a question.
We need more details, I guess.
More details. But the answer, yes, it is.
It is. I guess he means the teacher's perspectives. I mean, as a teacher, to apply reflective teaching, because he uses the term teaching.
It's, I would say it's worthy of the time that's devoted to it, because the outcomes are so positive that, so you constantly improve as you are reflecting on your own practice. So you don't make the same mistakes over and over again, and you don't actually have to talk about the same things over and over again. So reflective practice eventually helps with any teaching practice. So I think the time that's devoted to it is worthy. But you don't have to do, all of the reflective activities. You don't have to have a blog and a wiki and a YouTube channel, and just choose one thing. If you're more of if you like writing, you could just have a journal, write in that journal. If you like more interaction, then you can do this orally. At SFL, you have your teachers' lounges. Those are like perfect platforms for reflection. You go to the teachers' lounge. What do you do during the breaks? Complain about what happened in class, right? So actually, you can reformat that, complaining, and then it can turn into reflection sessions about what can be done better. So the answer is yes.
It is hocam. Hocam, another question is from Filiz hocam. She asks if the speaking rubric you showed during the presentation depend on your own criteria. Did you design the speaking rubric by yourself?
Yes, all of the rubrics that I've shared, I've either adapted from our group's rubrics, or I designed them specifically for my classes and for my classes' tasks. So I don't ever use general rubrics for any of my classes. I have a very specific analytical rubric for every single assignment that my students do. So I have become quite an expert in preparing rubrics because I really like them. I like that, they give an idea to the students about how they're going to be graded, because, for skills like writing and speaking, they could be very subjectively graded. And I really want my students to understand where their weaknesses are and why, they lost points in that, and why, what is good about their performance and what needs to improve. So I want to make that very clear, because I don't have a lot of time with my students. I have just, 14 weeks, and not all of them is very effective. So the rubrics are very specific to the tasks that I ask for from my students in class.
Okay, hocam. And if anyone needs help, assistance about designing rubrics, then they may contact you. I'm sure they can.
Definitely, I would be very happy to share any rubrics with anyone.
Okay, hocam. Canan hocam, I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly, hocam, and excuse me if I mispronounce your name.
Is it Xhana?
Yes, yes.
Jana. Yes, I know.
Canan hocam asked the question. Good. I'm glad I pronounced it correctly then. She says, as a teacher, she feels she is sometimes extremely overwhelmed, like all of us,
Yes.
happens. It is difficult to find time to write about and reflect on my teaching. Should institutions facilitate this practice for their teachers, and how?
If facilitate means force, then no. Again, it has to be voluntary. Of course, institutions can make strong recommendations for teachers to be reflected. But, you don't have to take a lot of time in your day. Everybody has a smartphone, don't they? You could just get out of class, and instead of checking Instagram, you could just, record your voice and say, blah, 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 blah. And you could, complain about what happened in class. And, this is what one of my students told me. It was very nice. And that's it. You don't need a lot of time. You just need to think about your class for 5 minutes after you leave it. And maybe right after you leave a class, 5 minutes, you could just record your voice or write something down. And then let that sink in, sleep over it. And the next day, write something more or record something more. Just think about the experience again. It doesn't take a lot of time. It just takes willingness. And because that's not part of our educational system, and I don't know about Jana's educational system, but probably the same thing, we're not used to this practice. It just seems too new, too foreign, too, difficult. And it actually isn't. So institutions can enforce this, can recommend this, and can organize ways of helping teachers go with reflection. But eventually, they would need that wholeheartedness and sense of responsibility.
Exactly, hocam. So facilitate is a nice choice, as a word there, rather than force then, yeah. There are also nice comments, hocam. For example, one hocam says, he or she, sorry, I just can't see your name. They have their video still. Their first demo teaching, and they were shaking, like you mentioned. You know, after four years of teaching, they say it is still very cute. Yeah.
I would love to analyze those initial videos if anybody's willing to share them.
Yeah, it's also, it's a good idea to record
Very nice.
them.
Just
like
look at
years
initial
after.
videos and then look at videos now, you know, after maybe like 5 years of teaching, and compare the performance. That would make an excellent research project. Get in touch with me, people. Yes.
And a good source to reflect on, of course.
Exactly, definitely, and see, you know, if they have been engaged in reflective teaching, if that actually had an influence on their improved performance.
Exactly, hocam. Hocalarım, dear participants, do you have any other questions, any other comments? By the way, that's Berke hocam. That's his comment. Thank you, Berke hocam. Do you have any other questions, any other comments, hocalarım? If not, I guess, then thank you all very much for your participation. Like I said, there are a lot of people actually throughout the country and from abroad. Betül hocam's former students, our colleagues. It has really been an enlightening and inspiring session, Betül hocam. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Like it has always been, it was a pleasure again to listen to you and to learn from you.
Thank you, hocam. For me too. It was a pleasure to be with you, and it was a pleasure to, you know, be part of your speaker series.
Thank you so much. And hocam, to express our gratitude to you, we have a little present for you. Yeah, we'd like to share it with you now.
Oh, that's great. Oh, I'm so happy you did this for me. Hold on. Where's mine?
You're gonna receive it. But yeah, we wanted to donate to Tema Foundation for children and their interaction with the nature.
Oh, that's perfect. Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you very much. This is very, very meaningful. Yes.
Thank you so much, hocam.
Sure.
Hocam, would you like to say a few words to wrap up?
Yes, this was very inspiring. So as you see, I did not promise too much. Hoca is a great scholar and a great speaker.
Thank you, Bilal hocam.
And infectious when it comes to positivity. So it was great to have you. Thank you, everybody, for being with us. I saw good old friends, former professors, Joshua Hoca, Ülker Hoca, Babürhan, Ali Fuat, all these people from like all around Turkey and from abroad. It's great to at least, it was great to see your names at least. Yeah, they were all with us. So thank you, everybody, and thank you to our PDU people for making this possible. And bye-bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Have a good evening. Thank you very much.